Connecting, here we go. All right. All right, well, good morning and welcome everybody. My name is Carl Jacobs. I'm with the Recreation Conservation Office. This is day 2 of WWRP Riparian Protection Evaluations. And we have 5 projects today, starting with the Jefferson Land Trust, kicking it off. Can you guys see the PowerPoint with the schedule now? Do I got the right screen sharing? Okay, great. Blaze, I'm going to open your presentation. Can you see that okay? Excellent. All right, I'm going to stop my video, give you control. There you are. You might have to double click on the screen to activate it. All right.
Okay.
Good. We'll go right ahead whenever you're ready.
I'm going to wait for it to go back. There we go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Blaze Sullivan, and I'm the Conservation and Stewardship Coordinator with the Jefferson Land Trust. I want to thank all of you who helped with the technical review of the application and presentation, and I'm excited to be talking about our Salmon Creek Ruck project again. Our property is located in Jefferson County on the Northeast Olympic Peninsula, along the Strait of Juan de Fuca, south of Discovery Bay. And you can see from this project area map, the Ruck property is outlined in red. It's 155 acres that our project goal is to acquire this property in fee simple and to conduct restoration along its tributaries of Salmon Creek. Just for a context of the watershed, Salmon and Snow Creek watershed have been a priority conservation focus area of many regional partners that I'll speak more about because of this watershed being a stronghold for the ESA threatened summer chum. This zoomed in parcel map shows some of the unique features of this property, including 6 tributaries that lead into Salmon Creek. We have 1.1 miles of Salmon Creek running through the property, the main stem, and it runs from river mile 1.4 to 2.5. You can also see here that surrounding the property on 3 sides is private timberland, currently owned by Rayonier. And then to the east is a conservation easement currently held by Jefferson Land Trust. Some of the unique ecological features of this property include its topography. This photo here shows the steep slopes that lead down to the main stem of Salmon Creek. The slopes drop about 100 to 150 feet from the upland forest at about a 42-degree slope throughout the entire property. And we're able to get this sort of vantage on the property because of the BPA power line corridor that exists through a small stretch of the property along about a quarter of it on the east side. But you can see on the right-hand side of the photo some of the current conditions of the property. On the right-hand side is the riparian buffer along the main stem. And then to the left, you can see that some of the history of the property is that it was clear cut in the 90s. And so that is what is mostly affecting what we're seeing today. And this next photo is showing what the main stem of Salmon Creek is on the Ruck property. And we consider this a highly functioning habitat. There's log jams, large woody debris, rocks and riffles, and other fluvial diversity that are of a great asset to several salmonid species that have occurrence throughout this property. That includes and then this is to show some of the ecological characteristics of the upland forest. So about 70% of this property, or about 70 acres of this property, is riparian and 85 acres is upland forest that has a lot of similarities to this photo shown here. We have dense red alder with either a salmonberry understory because of some wet conditions, or a failing Douglas fir crop that had been planted after a majority of the property was clear cut in the 90s, but has not been upkept. And so really it's a high density of red alder. This map shows the riparian area of the Ruck property, which, as I said, is just a little bit less than half of the property, but we're looking at about 250 feet of riparian buffer along the main stem of Salmon Creek. And then this map here also shows what the 125-foot buffers along the tributaries that we're hoping to conduct with our restoration efforts through this grant. There are several salmonid species that this property has occurrence of. The ESA listed summer chum as well as ESA threatened winter steelhead use this property as spawning habitat. And there's also occurrence of coho and fall chum. This map here shows the Ruck property outlined in black, and the red line is showing the spawning habitat of summer chum fish. And so we can see that they're using at least the lower quarter of the property. The Ruck property is also classified as priority aquatic and conservancy by the Washington Shoreline Master Plan. And by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Ruck property has occurrence of priority freshwater forested shrub habitat. Another really important factor of such a large parcel like this of 155 acres is that our ability to protect this amount of upland forest and is really serving as a connective habitat from both the estuary at the head of Discovery Bay, leading all the way up to the foothills of the Olympic Mountains. And this is really important for large mammals that are including carnivores like cougars that are most impacted by human development, such as forestry activities and other infrastructure development and agriculture. And so the opportunity to protect such a large swath of forest land that's already in an area of a lot of protected properties within this watershed is really essential for big mammals like this. As you can see on this photo, we've already identified some black bear sign. On the left-hand side is bear scratches on a western red cedar down along Salmon Creek. And then on the right-hand side, you can see our conservation director, Sarah Spaeth, finding really excitedly some bear scat along the BPA power line corridor, which we also know animals use for movement. There's also several flowering herbaceous plants and flowering shrubs that service native pollinators in Washington state. Here pictured is trillium, but we also have an abundance of salmonberry and red flowering currant throughout the property. But we also anticipate that the restoration plans that we are hoping to conduct with this grant are going to increase the diversity of plant species and flowering shrubs that will continue to benefit pollinators more than the current conditions of the property of regeneration after the clear cut in the 90s. This map shows some of the more detailed aspects of the Ruck property. Once again, you can see the 65-acre conservation easement on the east side adjacent to Ruck, and this was protected for the purpose of riparian protection. You can also see the BPA power line corridor that runs through the eastern side of the parcel with the white striations. And that actually, the BPA corridor actually only affects about a 300-foot section of the main stem of Salmon Creek and does not affect any of the 6 tributaries. The blue outlines show our restoration focus area on these 6 tributaries. And while the polygons outlined here can look like it's about 5 tributaries, it's because there's 2 that are joined quite closely together on the north and west side. And so there are 6 individual tributaries leading from the northwest and south into Salmon Creek. And then briefly, I'll talk more about this later in the presentation, but we have the Pacific Northwest Scenic Trail that currently exists on the property that Jefferson Land Trust intends to maintain access for. I'd like to go back to this map again to describe the protection efforts that have been happening in the Salmon and Snow Creek watershed for the last 20 years. The blue polygons are conservation easements. Green polygons are lands owned by Jefferson Land Trust, and then the orange are lands owned by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, mostly surrounding the natal estuary of Snow and Salmon Creek. And this watershed has been considered a high priority for conservation and restoration actions due to it being the stronghold for summer chum subpopulation. And a lot of progress has been made to restore the Salmon and Snow Creek estuary and near shore to provide healthy rearing habitat for juvenile salmon. And we believe, and many of our partners believe, that the protection of ruck would leverage these investments made in the estuary and lower watershed to protect a significant reach of spawning habitat for summer chum. And this will bring us closer to our recovery goals. The Jefferson Land Trust is part of a consortium that's called a regional consortium called Chumsortium that has the focus of conducting restoration and conservation initiatives to delist the summer chum salmon. And so we've been working collaboratively for over 20 years with the partners listed here that are all coordinated by our local lead entity for salmon recovery, the Hood Canal Coordinating Council. And so each time Jefferson Land Trust is thinking about embarking on a riparian or salmon-focused protection project, we always bring that idea to our Chumsortium partners to see if they agree that this is a regional priority. And the Chumsortium partners have identified the ruck property as a priority actually for the last 20 years for acquisition and protection. And Jefferson Land Trust got close to being able to protect the ruck property back in 2009. We were awarded a Salmon Recovery Funding Board grant at that time, and we got as far as getting an appraisal report for the property, but then the former landowner was dissatisfied with the value we were able to offer. So both Jefferson Land Trust and other partners, part of the Chumsortium, are really excited that we have the opportunity to work with a new willing landowner for the permanent protection of this property. We were able to take some of these partners out along with our Conservation Projects Committee on some initial site visits. And there was some really strong support from our partners, including from WDFW staff, because they were able to tell us that their spawning survey technicians have actually been denied access to the ruck property for the last several years. And WDFW would really like to be able to have access to this stretch of the creek so that they can conduct their spawning surveys. Jefferson Land Trust also applied for Salmon Recovery Funding Board funds again in 2022 earlier, and we had our initial site visits, and there was a lot of positive initial feedback and support. Jefferson Land Trust has been in existence for over 30 years, and we have really experienced conservation staff and stewardship staff. We have 4 staff members that help to conduct both our conservation easement and our fee simple management. We have 4 staff members that are experienced in conducting baseline conditions report and writing stewardship and management plans for the purpose of getting the properties that we own and steward toward the desired future conditions that we have. We want to make sure that the lands that we own are in their highest functioning habitat so that they can be climate resistant and resilient in the change that we're facing. And so with our experience of stewarding, of owning over 700 acres in East Jefferson County, we feel prepared to take on the 155 acres of the ruck property and the restoration that we are proposing in this grant. You can see here again the 6 tributaries highlighted for restoration. And that's because there's really, back to the current conditions of the property and the history that has made it sort of a Douglas fir monoculture that's actually failing. We want to conduct as much improvement on this property as we can for the purpose of retaining groundwater recharge, reducing sedimentation into the main stem of Salmon Creek. And this next photo is an example of one of the southern tributaries that leads into the main stem. And back in the 90s, when the property was clear cut, the forest practice rules only required a 25-foot buffer on either side of the tributaries. And what that really looks like on the ground is just about 1 conifer on either side. And both our staff and other regional experts believe that we should be expanding those tributary buffers to 125 feet. And so those are our restoration plans. is to conduct patch cuts of these dense red alder riparian buffers, and then interplant it with a diversity of conifer species native to Western Washington, such as Western red cedar, grand fir, hemlock. And we're going to do those patch cuts of the red alder, leave the logs on the ground to help with water retention and coarse woody debris to help build up the soil, but also maintain some of the mycorrhizal connections left with the trees that we will leave on site. And our desired future conditions of this restoration project is for it to be as highly functioning as the main stem of Salmon Creek on this property is. So once again, we want to see downed woody debris. We want to see a diversity of species, both in age and species type, with a diversity of shrub species and the understory as well, so that we can be shading the tributaries and protecting the steep slopes that lead down to Salmon Creek. Our staff has been growing in our experience of conducting and managing restoration projects like this. This photo here is from last year when our staff was leading a project on our Valley View Forest Preserve. We were conducting an ecological forestry thinning project. It was sort of a pilot project for a community forest that we're starting in Chimicum. And so we have gained a lot of knowledge over the last several years about what it means to be planning for ecological forestry and restoration, and what it means to be working with foresters and loggers. And we believe that we're ready to take on a restoration project such as the rock property that we're proposing. And this photo shows some of the conditions of what ecological forestry prescription can look like afterwards. You can see many of the downed logs and branches that are left on the forest floor for soil regeneration and water retention, and then also some of the flagged trees that were left behind, so that we're still having shading and we're still having those mycorrhizal connections for the health of the forest and allowing for strong regeneration. The threats to this property are mostly coming from the fact that the current landowner is eager and needs to sell the property by the end of 2023. And so if Jefferson Land Trust is unable to purchase this property and protect it with grant funds that we're applying for in 2022, the landowner will post it to the open market next year. And we can see two primary ways that this property could be converted from permanent protection. And that would be it either being put back into commercial forestry, like this photo was showing of after the clear cut in the 90s. We can see what happens and how little of the riparian buffer is left along Salmon Creek and its tributaries. And with the existence of 3 properties surrounding the ruck, we can see that commercial forestry is a very likely future use of this property if it's not protected by Jefferson Land Trust. Alternately, when we got an appraisal report back in 2009, this the rock property is zoned 1 in 80, and we think that there might be as many as up to 2 residential development rights on the property because of this, and that could be a threat that this property be subdivided and developed that would permanently impact the slopes and water quality of the downstream Salmon Creek. There's many community benefits to the Ruck property. I mentioned earlier that the Pacific Northwest Scenic Trail has an alternate route that is designated through the Ruck property. The Pacific Northwest Scenic Trail is a through hike that starts in Montana and goes all the way along the West Coast over to the West Coast of the Olympic Peninsula. And this photo here shows one of the current conditions of what the trail looks like on site at Ruck today. And while we're not planning any additional development for public access or more development of this trail, Jefferson Land Trust is excited to continue to allow through hikers and other day hikers to utilize this trail. And we've actually heard from hikers that this is the preferred route, even though it is an alternate route for the Pacific Northwest Trail. We can also see that the protection of such a large amount of riparian and upland forest in this area would be really beneficial to other partners of ours, such as the Jamestown Slalom and the Port Gamble Slalom tribe, because Jefferson Land Trust has been working really hard to develop and strengthen our partnerships with the tribes. And we have been able to provide access to various nature preserves that we own for traditional and culturally significant uses that the tribes otherwise don't have land access to in some ways. And so this photo demonstrates our partnership with the tribes. This is them harvesting some cedar bark on another nature preserve that we own in East Jefferson County. And we can see the Ruck property as being able to enhance access for traditional uses as well. Additionally, we can foresee that education could be a primary or could be a really beneficial use here as well. We really work strongly with our local school districts, and with the importance on mounted habitat here and the restoration that we're planning, we can see bringing children or continuing education for adults out onto this property to learn about how to be caring for these lands and these waters that all matter to us so much. And I welcome any questions.
Blaze, wow, right on time. There goes my timer. Whoops, go back. All right, questions from the committee or clarifications needed? Any slides you might need to jump back to? Not seeing any hands up yet. Maybe you covered it all. You mentioned that alternate route is preferred. Is it by hikers mostly that's preferred by, or other users as well?
I think mostly hikers. There are mountain bikers that use the trail as well.
Okay. A little off topic from Riparian, but I was curious. All right. Anything else that the committee needs? Maybe you covered it pretty thoroughly. You must have.
Yeah, and our caffeine is still kicking in.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Nate. Oh, there we go. Nate, and then Peter.
Hey, Blaze. So all the restoration that you cited was targeted on the tributary streams. Is there a need for restoration on the stream itself or plans for that in the future? Can you just speak to why you identified the tributaries as the priorities?
We identified the tributaries because we do consider the main stem of Salmon Creek as highly functioning at this point. The buffers that had been left after the clear cut were about 200 to 250 feet on either side. And so we believe that the main stem is in good condition, and it's really the tributary buffers that need a lot of improvement because of how narrow they currently are. And that, yeah, both that's our input and the input of the other consortium partners who came out on site visits with us as a priority.
Awesome, thank you.
And I'm all set, Carl. Thanks, Blaze.
Okay, thanks, Peter. All right, anything else? Going once? Going twice? All right, well, thank you, Blaze, for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, we'll see you later.
Bye.
All right, folks, why don't you just take a minute to finish scoring that project, move on to the next one in the system. So we're ready to go. And then it looks like Fish and Wildlife is here. Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, and tell me your name. I can't tell.
Yeah, sorry, it's Justin. The last name is Haug.
Justin.
H-A-U-G.
Great. Thanks, Justin. Good morning.
Morning.
All right, I'm going to get your PowerPoint up. And are folks ready to go? If you need another minute, let me know. I just want to make sure committee members are ready to move on. All right, North Okanagan Inn Holdings. All right, hearing no objection, let's move on. Justin, I'm going to stop my video, pass you remote control. So double click on the screen there. And all right, looks like you got it. And whenever you're ready, go right ahead.
Right. Well, thank you, Carl, and thank you everybody for having me today. I'm Justin Haug. I'm the Okanagan Lands Operations Manager for Region 2 North. And I don't see Scott Fitkin, who is our district wildlife biologist, is here to help answer questions, but I see Lisa is. So hopefully if there are any questions that I can't answer, they will or she will. And I'm here to present the North Okanagan County WWRP Inn Holdings project. So the project is located in northern Okanagan County, just south of the Canadian border, near the town of Oroville. And the project includes two properties. One we're going to call the eastern property is the Driscoll IHOT property, and the other is the Similkameen Chapaka property. And here's a map of the area. You can see that the Driscoll IHOT Island property is about 16.5 acres located south of Oroville at the confluence of the Okanagan and Similkameen River. And the Similkameen Chapaka property is further to the west, is located about a mile and a half, 2 miles south of the Canadian border on the east side of the Similkameen River. And so the goal of this project is to acquire these properties that total about 53.5 acres for the protection of riparian habitats adjacent to the Similkameen River. And by bringing these properties into WWDFW ownership, the project will protect in perpetuity priority riparian habitats. It provides added protections for a variety of PHS species, and increases protections on surrounding public lands. It also provides the recreating public increased opportunities and supplements the ongoing educational efforts that we have locally in the area. And so here you can see an example of the property on the Similkameen Chapaka property, where it consists of a mix of wetland, riverine, riparian, and forested meadows. And here you can see a cottonwood kind of forest, a kind of cottonwood gallery along the Similkameen River. The other property, the Driscoll IHOP property, you can see that it also has a large cottonwood forest component, but it also has significant riverine and other riparian habitats. There's the cottonwood galleries here have significant cavity nesting habitat, and additionally beaver activity associated with the property. And here's just an example of the two properties where you have these kind of low-lying swales that contain a mix of native grasses, sedges, and willow. And both these properties seasonally flood in the spring, which creates varying environments for a variety of different species. But the Similkameen Chapaka property has a number of other habitats associated with it. Here you can see that there's also on the eastern portion steep rocky cliffs and some talus. There's some shrub steppe and a number of acres of ponderosa pine or mixed conifer habitat adjacent to the river. So it provides a number of different habitats for different species like swifts and swallows, golden eagles for the cliffs, as well as a number of different species that utilize the forested ecosystems on this property. And another secondary effect of having that forested area adjacent to the river is that it provides input of large woody debris into the riparian system. And you can see on the photo here, the area did burn in 2007 actually. And so, you know, this debris that eventually tumbles over will potentially make it into the river and provide that structure for a variety of species. You can see from on the Driscoll IHOP property, there's a bit of an emergent meadow, and it's apparent on Similkameen and Chewacca as well. But this provides patches of milkweed and a number of different grass species. And if you're a picker of asparagus, this is a great spot for that. So when considering priority species, there's a number here on both properties. You can see that there are mule deer and whitetail populations that utilize the island. Game bird species such as ringneck pheasant and California quail are in large numbers here. Cavity nesting or birds like, you know, the pileated woodpecker. There's a population of California bighorn sheep just east on Mount Hull that cross the river and use the area for foraging. And there's a number of waterfowl species as well. But the species, you know, most important here is the Upper Columbia steelhead, and this federally threatened species uses the area adjacent to the Similkameen, or uses the Similkameen and Okanagan rivers to breed. In a survey in 2017 by the Colville Confederated Tribe, this stretch of the Okanagan from the confluence to Zozel Dam and Orville had the highest estimated abundance of steelhead spawners, both natural and hatchery. And in 2020, only 850 spawners made it into the system in 2020. So this is it's an important area to protect for the protection of the Upper Columbia steelhead. The area also has a lot of other species as well. The Driscoll Island has a high number of owl species, like these long-eared owls you see here. A lot of migratory birds, neotropical birds, like the warblers you see, pine grosbeaks. And after the area floods, you get some birds like the soar, rails and wading birds like sandpipers in the area. So it's a really diverse area. Additionally, like I mentioned, it's an area where you often see a number of beavers, and in this photo you actually see mule deer, a priority species, and beaver kind of inhabiting the same space, which is it's just a really interesting site here on the banks of the Okanagan. And there's and in terms of priority habitats, these two properties provide obviously the riparian habitat, but also on the Similkameen and Chewacca property, you have intermountain basin shrub steppe, which is a priority habitat, as well as pine woodland. So it's a really diverse mix of habitats here. And this map shows sort of the percentage of riparian habitat using the National Wetland Inventory, and you can see that about 43% of the Similkameen and Chewacca property is either freshwater emergent wetland, forested wetland, or riverine. The remainder, the eastern portion, are also important habitats like shrub steppe and ponderosa pine woodland. On the Driscoll IHOP property, the entire property is considered riparian. The brown is emergent wetland, and the green is the wooded shrubland. When looking at pollinators, I mean, both properties have a diverse suite of plant species that benefit pollinators. This photo shows milkweed, which is in high concentrations on both properties. And many of you know milkweed is the sole host plant for the monarch butterfly caterpillar, but it also benefits a number of other species such as native bees, native flies, beetles, and other species of butterflies. And here's just an example of some of the pollinator habitat you find on the Similkameen Chapaka property. You have shrub steppe flowers like blanket flower, yarrow, phlox, and lupin, but also a variety of shrubs that provide feeding potential like rabbit brush, mock orange, and serviceberry. So this map kind of indicates, where the other protected lands are associated next to the property. On the left is the Driscoll IHOP property. You can see that it's adjacent to the Driscoll IHOP unit of the Sinlahican Wildlife Area, and it's the last private inholding on the island. Next to that is a Department of Reclamation property, and outside of the area is mostly orchard and pasture lands adjacent to the unit. But further to the east, you have BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands associated with Mount Hull and other federal properties to the northwest of the area. And on the Similkameen Chapaka property, it's surrounded by Department of Natural Resources and Fish and Wildlife, and a lot of Bureau of Land Management property on either side. So one of the cool things about both these areas is that by protecting this, it helps raise the level of linkage across these areas. And you can see that the property here is next to within the Similkameen Valley, which is this broad valley bordered by steep walls, but it provides this north-south linkage through the Similkameen Valley for a number of different species that either migrate or go across the landscape seasonally. And the same can be said for the property on IHOT Island, where there's this corridor north-south. Canada is just off this map that helps species migrate up and down this river corridor from utilizing the riparian habitat here. And these two maps kind of show the importance of the properties being within these linkages. The map on the left is one from the Washington Connected Landscape Project, and it specifically calls out the Similkameen Chapaka Mountain connection as an important linkage for a number of shrub steppe species. And on the right, it shows that the valley itself, which is the only arid habitat corridor in the U.S., provides this ability for species to move north and south as climates change. It's important to protect these areas for that migration. And an interesting side note, just north of the border, Canada is proposing a national park reserve. And you can see from the map that potential reserve is just north of the border. And so, both these properties, knowing that they sort of enhance that effort, or it's sort of a cross-boundary landscape approach to protecting these valuable habitats, is a really interesting aspect of this project. So how are the level of protection and the level of protection for both properties is they will be protected in perpetuity, managed as part of the wildlife areas, both the Sinlaheakin Wildlife Area and Scotch Creek Wildlife Area, for the purpose of preserving, protecting, and perpetuating the state's fish and wildlife and ecosystems. And this project is supported by a number of plans. It's mentioned in the State Wildlife Action Plan by addressing the conservation needs of a number of species of greatest conservation needs and dependent riparian habitats. And the plan identifies acquisition as an important non-regulatory tool for protecting areas with high habitat value or biodiversity. So acquisition here would be the best alternative for long-term protection and stewardship of critical habitats. It's also supported by our 25-year strategic plan by protecting key ecosystems that have a long-term benefit for fish and wildlife, as well as provide additional recreation lands for a growing public usership. And as I previously discussed, it provides that connectivity to protect the spawning upper Columbia steelhead and other critical species. And so this project is also supported by a number of partners. Conservation Northwest has been a key partner in many of our acquisitions in the past and supports this one as well. And the Okanagan Land Trust has been with us for a long time and providing critical input and support when seeking to conserve on a landscape level. In fact, they're seeking to conserve property close to this project as well. So we're working together in a landscape approach to protect these critical areas. And we get a lot of support from members such as our Wildlife Area Advisory Committee when we talk about the importance of these acquisitions, as well as outreach through our Lands 2020 process. So when we request to acquire properties, that goes out for public review. And we meet with county officials, and so we were able to garner support for these projects during those times. So in terms of organizational capacity, the wildlife areas have a staff of 7 full-time employees and a number of non-permanent staff, field staff that do a lot of the field work, like noxious weed control and fence maintenance. We also have a large district staff that includes biologists, assistant biologists, conflict specialists, enforcement officers that help us manage our properties, as well as a number of statewide specialists and resource teams that maybe look specifically at forest health or salmon protection or what have you. We also have a fairly large budget, about $500,000 biannually to manage these properties. So adding these, 50 acres shouldn't be a hill too steep to climb. We have had recent increases in capital investments, which are going to help in this project. And we have a lot of operation and maintenance dedicated to project funding. And in the case of the Similkameen Chapaka, we also have funding for fuels work in the event we want to do some restoration or some fuels work to reduce the risk of another catastrophic wildfire. And like I mentioned, so these two properties are will be a part of the Scotch Creek and Sinlaheakin Wildlife Area Management Plan. The two wildlife areas combined to create a plan, and so we'll use that plan to guide our management of both parcels for the benefit of fish, wildlife, and those who enjoy it. And we also lean on a lot of project partners such as the Okanagan Conservation District. I mentioned the Land Trust, the county itself, who we partner with in the Similkameen Chapaka area to do a lot of our weed control efforts, as well as the Mule Deer Foundation, who've been a really great partner through a number of projects. So threats to the site. One of the threats that is possible is, suction dredging is something. Gold dredging on the Similkameen River is a popular activity, and the potential impacts to that are obviously water quality and the threats for some of the freshwater mussel species we have in the Similkameen and Okanagan rivers, and those would be the western ridge mussel, western pearl shell, and floater mussels. There's also unknown threats, really, incompatible land uses. So if these properties sell, it's really not knowing what a potential private landowner might do, whether they convert the property. Obviously, the potential for building a home is very low, but that's not to say that a private landowner couldn't do something like convert property from riparian to farm, or to put in some sort of recreation opportunity. So we really want to protect these properties from what we may not know is coming, and make sure that they're conserved in perpetuity. And I mentioned the dredging, gold dredging. It's increasing in frequency in the Similkameen, and it could affect the survival of these mussel species. One of which is a species that's of concern in Canada, and any efforts that we make to protect these species also benefits our Canadian counterparts. There are some multiple benefits. The island, floods annually, and it slows, flows down. It could also recharge aquifers, and there's potentially limited agriculture on Ihot Island, but it's not something that it'd be a significant benefit for us. And on the Similkameen Chapaka property, again, is aquifer recharge. There is significant agricultural use adjacent to the property across the river. We have ranchers that grow a lot of hay to feed their cattle, and this annual flooding helps recharge those systems to benefit their businesses, and that's a benefit here. There's some forest activities that could be made, but access is limited, and that's a challenge. So not too many potential for a forest benefit. In terms of public access, the Similkameen Chapaka property is directly across from a water access area on the Similkameen Chapaka unit of the Scotch Creek Wildlife Area. It's also adjacent to the Greater Columbia Water Trail that starts just north of this property and travels both past this property and the property on Ihot Island. And so access is we're not going to be increasing access potential, but the public will have the same access they've always had to enjoy the property for a number of different uses. And the same for Ihot Island. People access Driscoll Ihot from a single location north of the property. Crossing the river, you have great upland bird hunting opportunities for the birds I've mentioned, pheasant, quail, grouse. And again, it's part of the water trail system. So both areas provide a kind of a stopover point for people that are enjoying the Similkameen River, which is a extremely scenic river system. So the educational and scientific opportunities, we have a lot of ongoing work right now. We often, every year we bring in the ecology of the Okanagan class from Okanagan High School, and they do a number of studies in the Okanagan River adjacent to the IHOP project site, where they look at aquatic invertebrates, they study stream flow, and they learn a lot about the riparian systems. We also work with elementary school age students regarding the benefit of beaver dams, beavers, and riparian habitats. You can see on the right we have an event at Scotch Creek for the last 2 years, partnering with the North Central Educational Services District that brings in classes from Orville and Tonasket to learn about the riparian habitats and beavers. In the future, the Similkameen Chapaka property would be a really interesting location to study bat populations because of the habitat there that would support a number of different species, as well as the before mentioned freshwater mussel species that we don't know a whole lot about. There's only been a handful of surveys, so in the future we'd like to do more intense surveys to determine what's actually there. I think that is it. And I appreciate your time today, and I'll take any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Justin. Questions on this project or clarifications needed? Kurt, go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for the presentation. I wanted to check in on the mineral dredging. Does acquisition by Fish and Wildlife under your land designation, does that prevent the dredging? What's the relationship generally to conservation lands and the dredging permits issued by, I believe it's your agency?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. I guess I would hesitate to answer that without having someone from the Habitat program be here, but I would suspect that they would be treated fairly similarly than that as like other federal lands are, but I guess I really can't answer that.
So I guess for my scoring purposes, if you were to say that there was going to be a change and dredging would be disallowed, that would be better, but you can't quite say that.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Kurt.
All right, thanks, Nate. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. Nice presentation, beautiful photographs. Back on slide 10, you described the island habitat as meadow habitat. It looks like agricultural or former agricultural. Can you clarify what that land historically has been or would be?
Yeah, so there is an individual that has a lease for dry land. Well, it's non-irrigated farming, so it's been farmed. I think one cutting a year on that island for a number of years. I think we acquired IHOT Island, I think in 2007, and since that time, there's been active agriculture on that property.
Okay, so is that like basically cutting like reed canary grass, or is it being planted into some sort of a crop?
No, it's not being planted. It's cutting kind of field grasses that are there. So it's a lot of Timothy, rough fescue, but there's also some native components in there. So it's just basically cutting the grasses that just reside on that island.
Okay, and for the foreseeable future, there wouldn't be a plan to, like, say, plant that to cottonwood or some other sort of like specific intentional riparian habitat?
Yeah, if funded, that potentially restoring that field either back to to some sort of either a forested area, or maybe start converting some of those non-native pasture grasses to a more native component would something we'd be interested in doing.
Okay. Last question is, are there barriers from county commissioners, in this case, barriers that would impede your ability to implement the project if funded?
No, so this part of the Lands 2020 process is that we meet with the county commissioners prior to moving forward with any acquisition, and this project was presented to them, and they supported us moving forward with acquisition.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, Justin, that property we're looking at on the screen right now on the Driscoll IHOT Island. When I look at the aerials, I don't see any road to that. Obviously they must drive across Fish and Wildlife property to get to it. Is is buying that going to reduce current impacts of them cutting hay and stuff, driving back and forth across Fish and Wildlife property?
No, so their access to that location is via a ford across the Okanagan River, and we have an administrative access from a property owner on the east side of the river. So they'll still be able to access the island as well as staff to get to that. Well, really, most of that is not applicable to their operation. And the public has access via both rivers, just not easy pedestrian access.
Okay, all right. So it's not like they have an easement across our property and they're currently harming Fish and Wildlife property to manage that parcel.
Sorry, say that again.
I said, so if I understood you correctly, they're not currently using some kind of easement across Fish and Wildlife property that's causing harm to Fish and Wildlife property.
No, they're utilizing our administrative access across the river.
Okay. But if we acquired it, it'd mean fewer people would be fording the river.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
Great. Other questions or clarifications needed? All right, there's one comment in the chat here from Nate, just to follow up to Kurt's question about the potential for, suction dredging and placer mining. And that I was thinking the same thing, and I'm going to have to do a little more digging. That's something that, we do want to allow recreational access. I don't know how impactful that is. And if that's something like RCO, like if you get a grant, our restrictions may preclude that sort of use if it's contradictory to the conservation goals of this particular grant program. So even if like Fish and Wildlife allows that maybe on some properties, there may be an additional restriction just by virtue of our funding. But I'll have to confirm that because that could have an impact on how folks score this particular project. So.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And just to clarify, currently there is no, dredging activity adjacent to either property, and most of it is concentrated upriver from Enlow Dam and south of Nighthawk. So I bring that up and as a potential threat if it expands beyond that point, but we just haven't seen that, and maybe our habitat rules don't go beyond that, but yeah, I'll if I can help clarify that in any way, just let me know. In fact, I'll work on getting some answers if that helps.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, whatever you can figure out here in the next hour and a half, because we're going to be wrapping up today about 11:30 or 12. And if you want to email, looks like Kim is your grants manager. If you want to email her, then we can get the information here to the committee before we wrap up. So whatever additional details you can get on that would be helpful.
Okay, will do.
Richard, do you have something else?
Yeah, on this topic of dredging, Justin, if the issue of like banning dredging was a make it or break it thing for acquiring this property, would you have the ability to prohibit dredging on that parcel?
Again, that's a question I would have to I'd have to run through Habitat, which is something I could do right now, but
okay. Because that if you have the authority or the ability to do that, that could eliminate the uncertainty.
Yeah. Usually things like that are higher level and then commission gets involved, but I'll I'll ask.
All right.
Great, thanks. Last call for any questions, clarifications needed on this one. Okay, I don't see any other hands. Thanks, Justin, appreciate it. And yeah, whatever information you can get back to us here in the next hour and a half would be helpful. And yeah.
All right, will do. I appreciate it, Carl, and everybody. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, take care.
All right, we've got a break, a few minutes behind schedule. You want to just stay on track and come back in 10 minutes at 10:15? Does that work for folks?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Okay. See you in a bit. All righty. Hey, everyone. Back, looks like Danielle is here from Fish and Wildlife for the next. Hello.
Hello.
Moving back over to Clallam County for this project.
Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you, yes, just fine. Can you see your opening slide there?
Yeah, I sure can.
Perfect. All right, let me pass your remote control, stop my video. There you are. All right. Double click on the screen there. You should be able to take it away.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. All right.
Let me,
Go back one.
oh yeah, the delay. Is it working?
Not yet. It's either a delay or you could try using your keyboard too.
Oh, that is what I was doing.
Oh, you were okay.
Let's see here. Let's try.
Let me. All right. Now it should be put it back on your opening slide. See if you can.
Okay, that's my opening slide. So now forward. Oh, that's the keyboard that is not working.
Well, I can advance for you.
Thank you. That might be helpful. I'm not sure
Okay,
why.
go ahead. I'll go ahead and do that. Just say next and I'll advance it.
All right, you got it. Are we ready to start?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, great. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Zittimer. I will be presenting the Twin Rivers Nearshore and West Twin River Land Acquisition Project on behalf of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Next slide, please. So our agency's mission is preserving, protecting, and perpetuating the state's fish, wildlife, and ecosystems while still providing sustainable fish and wildlife recreational and commercial opportunities. And we feel like this acquisition project really just lands at the intersection of those different values and gives us the opportunity to achieve conservation by managing, protecting, and restoring ecosystems for the long-term benefit of people and for fish, wildlife, and their habitats. Next. So yeah, we're located here in Clallam County on the North Olympic Peninsula. Next slide, please. On the Central Strait of Juan de Fuca in Ryan-Itane, which is the Cuyahoga watershed, and we're about 25 miles west of Port Angeles. Next slide, please. Looking at this project location, what you'll see here is this 55-acre outlined in red is our project area for today's presentation, and that's a part of this larger 216-acre geographic envelope, which is outlined in yellow. This area, this land is currently owned by Lafarge North American Mining Company, and they've owned this parcel in strategic reserve since they purchased it in 1998, with no mining occurring since that time. And the geographic envelope is bounded on the east by the west bank of the West Twin River. There's those tributaries that cross it, and bounded on the north by that Central Strait of Juan de Fuca. Next slide, please. Oh, and the reason why we're kind of going back and forth between talking about this project area and the geographic envelope is the acquisition would be seeking to purchase the entire geographic envelope, which Lafarge is looking to sell as a whole. And this is the last component of funding that we would need to be able to achieve that. So if we look here at these two slides, you can see some of the historic impact of that mining. The LiDAR on the right is just showing those land use indications that are really centered in this 55-acre parcel property, excuse me. Next slide, please. Okay, so going into the site history for this project, this black and white picture in the background is from 1965, showing this 55-acre area and the mining activities that took place there. And then if you look at the smaller picture that's over top, you're going to see the shoreline armoring and earthen pier structure that was installed in the late 1960s, and which is referred to locally as the mole. And so this is all significant because this structure and the shoreline armoring required Lafarge to have and DNR aquatics lease, or to have any owner have DNR aquatics lease, and that DNR aquatics lease required restoration of the shoreline prior to closure of the lease. And that lease expired in 2020. Next slide, please. So through the really extensive and remarkable work done by Coastal Watershed Institute, that restoration has been successfully completed. On the far left here, you see what the pre-project condition was like in 2015 with all that armoring. They had that armor, they removed all the armoring, took out all of, those hardened structures. And then there was a process-based restoration, just allowing the natural rework of this clean, contaminant-free native fill material via erosion, allowing it to feed the drift cell, which is starved for sediment, and functioned essentially, it functioned like the nearby landslide footprints in the area. To the point that by the end of 2019, Coastal Watershed Institute was able to publish their final monitoring report showing that the shoreline had been functionally restored, and thus allowing that DNR lease closure. Opens the opportunity for us to acquire this now with clean title. Next slide, please. So then to go over sort of our big picture acquisition goals, our first and foremost priority would be protection of ecosystem function. So we believe that conserving existing functionally intact ecosystems is the most effective approach to achieving a process-based and long-term lasting success on the landscape. Next slide, please. And we're also really motivated by the opportunity to protect such high quality fish habitat as what exists on this geographic envelope. So within the envelope, there's riverine and off-channel habitat, excuse me. Give me a sec. Also estuary and nearshore habitat, migratory corridor habitat, marine riparian, and forage fish spawning. And those marine habitats are predominantly located in this 55-acre project area. Next slide, please. In addition to those fish habitats, there's also a substantial amount of nationally declining coastal wetland present on this property, and we would value the opportunity to protect that habitat and the bird and insect and wildlife populations it supports, as well as the upland habitat that supports wildlife habitat. Next, please. Oh, and then lastly, our dual mission is to both conserve the natural resource for its own purposes, but also to enhance public access and public enjoyment of the land. So we would be able to take this property, this 216-acre property, which is in a really desirable place for the public, and take it from a privately owned, no trespassing property, and open it up for public access. Next slide, please. So those are sort of the big picture and like overarching goals that we have. I'm going to now go into the specific scoring criteria and try not to be like too mechanical, but I want to be really clear about how we're meeting each of these criteria. I'll spend the most time on this first one, criteria 1, the acquisition benefits, just because that's, I think, where the project just really shines. Next, please. If you look at this map, that top area in orange is the shoreline habitat, the marine shoreline habitat, and there are 15 acres, including their site potential tree height buffers. And then the blue that you're seeing here is the stream habitat, fish accessible stream habitat, with its site potential tree height buffer, and there's 52 acres of that stream habitat. And then the green is fish accessible wetland habitat or off-channel habitat for fish. So if we added those all together, we get to 85 total acres of buffered fish habitat present on the envelope. Next slide, please. Additionally, these periwinkle polygons are the freshwater emergent wetlands, and you can see they dominate this 55-acre area in red also. And we feel like these, while they're not fish accessible, these freshwater emergent wetland habitats are extremely important for the groundwater recharge, water quality benefit, prey production, bird and insect habitat, and the habitat complexity and habitat forming processes that they support. So there's 77 acres of that freshwater emergent wetland. If you add that to the 85 acres of the buffered fish habitat, you come up with 162 acres of total riparian and wetland habitats, which is over 75% of the 216 acre property. Next slide, please. This one's just showing sort of like how those wetlands are situated within this 55 acres and how they're sort of reclaiming that old mining area. And this has all the buffers taken off. That's why this is just like the literal outlines and delineations themselves. Next, please. I think I also just wanted to talk about how like interesting and complex the riparian habitat is here. If you add up the shoreline, the marine shoreline, and the banks of the West Twin River main stem within the geographic envelope, and those banks of the tributaries enclosed in the envelope, you find that you have a total of over 3.5 miles of linear shoreline, and that's all on just a 216 acre property. So it gives a good sense of that. Next, please. Oh yeah, so West Twin River itself within the geographic envelope is highly productive for steelhead, coho, and coastal cutthroat trout. And then the nearshore assemblage within this 55 acres and over in the estuary is exceptional in its nearshore richness and diversity. Historically, the West Twin River was also productive for fall chum and chinook. The chum have been greatly reduced and the chinook have been extirpated though. Next slide, please. Thank you. So within that nearshore area, we have ESA listed Chinook salmon. Over 50% of the salmon present in that nearshore and estuary area are from the Columbia River origin Chinook or Puget Sound Elwha origin Chinook ESUs. And that's from this executive summary cited here, done by Schaefer et al. In 2009. Also, this nearshore habitat has been listed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as critical habitat for bull trout. And then within the West Twin River, there's documented spawning for Pacific lamprey, which is a species of concern. Next slide, please. In addition to those ESA listed species, there's also all of these priority species habitats, and it is a notable flight corridor for marbled verlet. Next slide, please. And it's also a documented habitat for all of these species of greatest conservation. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we have our priority pollinator species, the purplish copper butterfly and juniper hair streak butterfly present on this property. And there's a real richness for pollinator communities, probably mostly because of all those wetlands that we have. It's really valuable habitat for these two priority pollinator species specifically. Next slide, please. Okay, so then looking at the surrounding land uses, this geographic envelope is just like located within kind of a mosaic, but you have in the immediately adjacent properties, residential, like private residential property, commercial forest, commercial timber, and privately owned timber property. But the property is also functionally connected to protected lands. You can see over on the right, that's the East Twin River, and those white polygons are conservation easements by the North Olympic Land Trust. And that big beige area, and this little beige area up at the top of East Twin, Those are all owned by Washington Department of Natural Resources. So this acquisition of this envelope would get us really close to full connectivity of protected land, just like one parcel away. Next slide, please. This one's quick. Our level of protection would be a wildlife conservation area and in perpetuity. So it doesn't get much better than that. Our wildlife, when we talk about like what does a wildlife conservation area mean? We manage wildlife conservation areas for species diversity, protection and enhancement of the mosaic of habitats, and maintenance and restoration of the native plant communities. So it should be a really good fit for this geographic envelope. Next slide, please. There's been a tremendous amount of planning and community support that's gone into this project, partially just because it has such a long history. Acquisition was identified all the way back in 2009 as the top recommendation for this watershed in the Twins Nearshore Restoration Work Group. Next slide, please. It's a top-ranked project in the Puget Sound Partnership's near-term actions for 2018 through 2022. And like interestingly, it's also the geographic envelope contains the control site for the separate project that's in that near-term action agenda. And that is the Strait of Juan de Fuca intensively monitored watershed restoration project. So our acquisition of this geographic envelope would allow us to protect those previous investments in the watershed as well. Next slide, please. North Olympic Peninsula lead entity for salmon has this as a really high ranked project in the 4-year work plan. It received a score of 4.639 out of a maximum total possible score of 5. And also within the RIA 19 draft recovery plan, this acquisition would address the limiting factors for the Central Strait. Next slide. We feel that we have the expertise, capacity, and commitment to be good stewards of this property. We have already done our internal Lands 2020 process. We have an existing PSAR grant, existing WWRP grant. We have the team in place. We've done the appraisal. Like we're really ready to go on this one. And we think that we'd be able to provide the best form of stewardship, and we would do so in perpetuity. Next slide, please. So this is a standalone project. It's its own item, this acquisition. But I wanted to acknowledge all of the heavy lifting done by the North Olympic Land Trust through their planning and management plan development efforts, and by the Coastal Watershed Institute specifically for bringing us to this opportunity today by doing all of that extensive restoration work that folks in this group are probably really familiar already without me needing to talk about it more. But I do want to acknowledge those great partners. Next slide, please. Okay, so once we acquire the property, we would be managing it as a wildlife conservation area under this North Olympic Wildlife Area Management Plan. We currently have over 1,800 acres. It has its own lake program and staff and full-time manager. And we would be developing a unit-specific management plan within this greater management plan. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think that the greatest risk would be to our stewardship success is just any risk associated with delay. We were actually fully funded for the acquisition of the entire geographic envelope according to our estimated budget. But because of how rapidly the cost of everything has escalated, we're now facing the shortfall that we're coming to you today for. And I think that that's an experience that a lot of folks engaged in this type of work are having. And I just have a lot of trepidation that if we aren't able to to take this across the finish line now, we could permanently lose the opportunity just to that rising cost or to private ownership. And that the the pressures that all increases. We have the population increases, our land use pressure increased, and then just like the cost increase that we're all experiencing. Next slide, please. It's currently zoned, the geographic envelope is currently zoned as commercial forestry with strong potential for small timber product. And these types of commercial forestry impacts are documented in that RIA 19 draft recovery plan as being the limiting factors for the Central Strait of Juan de Fuca, including like sediment, hydrologic process disruption, shoreline alteration and armoring, and then the riparian zone degradation. And we've all seen like the evidence of that at this specific location historically, that it's thankfully now recovered from, but we want to maintain that recovery. Next slide, please. And there are 5 development rights associated with the geographic envelope. And if we just look at analogous adjacent properties, we can see the impact of private ownership and land use practices, whether they're permitted or illicit, and how they can really reduce the ecological function of the habitat available. There's also another chance that mining could be resumed on this property. We don't rank that as a highly probable threat, but it's just market dependent. Next slide, please. There's been a tremendous amount of public outreach and engagement on this over the years, much of which was done by North Atlantic Land Trust and especially Coastal Watershed Institute. And then we engaged in some of that in our Lands 2020 process, where we received overwhelmingly enthusiastic and positive community support for our acquisition. Next, please. Oh, and we also presented this project to the Clallam County Board of County Commissioners. They were really supportive and have given us a letter of their support as well. I think some of the reason for the enthusiasm of that community support is all the potential community benefit that would be materialized through public access. So this area has good beach access, really excellent surfing, kayaking, and all of those really highly desirable types of non-consumptive recreational use. Also, remarkable and acknowledged birding habitat and wildlife viewing opportunities, nature photography. There's the old road grades from where the mining and timber work have happened, create a sort of natural existing trail system throughout the property that would be really great for hiking and trail running and opportunities like that. And then there's some consumptive use opportunity as well. It's a good shellfishing, fishing, smelting type of area as well. Next slide, please. These are the letters of commitment and letters of support that we've gathered during the we pulled these together from our Lands 2020 process, our PSAR grant process, and then the last WWRP process that we went through. Next slide, please. And lastly, I just wanted to say that I think this site has exceptional potential for community benefit through educational and scientific opportunity. There is a really unique fossil site located within the geographic envelope that has specimens highlighted at the Burn Natural History Museum. It contains the control site for that IMW, intensively monitored watershed project. It's an eBird hotspot, which is like a designation that people give to areas with exceptional abundance and diversity of birding for recreational bird watchers. And then we think that allowing public access would give a really good opportunity for Olympic Peninsula Audubon Society, Nature Bridge, Peninsula College, Burke Museum, and generally for enhancing and promoting educational and scientific opportunities in the community. That should be maybe next slide. Yeah, so I'm probably out of time. I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry if I went over.
Great, thanks, Danielle. Just a little bit. So I just want to clarify real quick. You're asking for almost 1.1 million. Will that buy the entire 200 something acres, or is that just the 55 acres? I wasn't really sure what the grant is paying for.
Yeah, so the grant would be paying for the 55 acres. And then I think there's some budget details showing like within that 55 acres, there is also a small unstable slope area where that fossil site is that would need to be not available to the public because of safety reasons. So I think that, yeah, it would be this project area and the specific work for this project area of this 55 acres.
Okay, gotcha. Because the metrics in Prism are showing the 216 acres, but really with this money, you're buying the 55.
That's my understanding. And I apologize if I'm not as well versed in our budget details. I'm the presenter for this project, but Lisa Kaufman is the person who put together our application for this round. But yes, we had in hand our full ask through PSAR and that previous WWRP grant, and that was for I think of just about 1.3 million. Was enough, and now is not. So
so that's an existing grant for
yes,
the remainder of the envelope.
correct.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so this is kind of like a phase 2 to buy the rest of it.
We're hoping to have it all phased at the same time. Lafarge wants to sell the entire geographic envelope.
Sure.
They're not really interested in dividing it up into little pieces. And so in order for us to achieve and use all of that grant funding that we have to purchase this entire acquisition area, we need a remaining amount of money, that 1.09 or $1,095,250 is our current, that's the current shortfall that stands between us and acquiring this entire geographic envelope. And so in order to merge the applications and sort of delineate like what money is going where, I believe that that's why Lisa has this separated out as a project within an envelope. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I got it. So for the purposes of this riparian application, it's you're buying 55 acres.
Correct.
With this $1.1 million. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. 55 acres, $1,095,250. And we'd be getting 55 acres of acquired land, the necessary like work for that acquisition, and then also would be unlocking the opportunity because it's an all or nothing deal to buy the entire property.
Right. Okay. Nate, you have a question, and then Peter.
Yeah, I did have questions on that. I still don't totally understand it, but I don't totally need to either. I think that's more Carl's job. This is the map I had a question about. So from some of the photographs looking to the south, it looks like there's some pretty high bluffs. And well, you can see it here on the topography lines. But there's a bunch of wetland up at the top. Can you describe, so to the south of those topo lines, can you describe the geography a little bit better here? How those wetlands exist up at the high portion of the property in the area that was formerly mined?
Totally. I think it might be actually helpful to jump to the next slide. So this actually shows kind of where those specific individual unbuffered wetlands are located. And you can see in this LiDAR, hopefully this is giving you that information that you're looking for, right? Like the real, these depressional areas in the landscape, which are not all, noticing these ones right at the top of that bluff. Those are not where we would have probably expected to see them, except for all of that land mount modification work that was associated with the prior land use activities. So all of these depressional areas have, well, not all of them, but you can see a majority of these depressional areas have now become these freshwater emergent wetlands.
Huh. That's interesting. So,
And that's why this is different than the previous map, because the previous map also has site potential tree height buffers. Whereas this is just showing like the actual delineated outlines of the wetlands themselves. We do have a wetland report that I think that is uploaded with the application also, if that's helpful.
thank you. So just to clarify, these emergent wetlands were created by the previous mining activity, or do you think that they existed on their own outside of that?
So this area is definitely one where we would expect freshwater wetlands to occur, right? And you can even see that if you just look to the adjacent west of the outlined red area, you still see a bunch of those emergent freshwater wetlands right there, and that's outside of the zone of those land use activities. I think that what happened is when the previous mining operation went in and made these big, flat spots and depressions, a lot of the existing wetlands were probably destroyed, but they created these areas which are now recolonized as freshwater emergent wetlands.
Okay. And you talked a lot about the capacity for restoration. Do you have a vision for restoration, particularly of those wetlands within the historic mining footprint?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think that one of the things that this slide certainly doesn't indicate, but if we kind of like go back through some of the photographs, is that remarkably many of those wetlands, these freshwater emergent wetlands, like are in really nice shape. There's this one, there's better ones in this too. And we see a lot of the concentration of those priority habitat and species, birds and insects there. I think that our management plan would be, there are a couple of surface water culverts that are remaining that we would probably be taking out to improve like that hydrologic function. And then primarily just native plant restoration and management of invasive species. There's remarkably few invasive species out here, and I think that is a temporary situation unless managed.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks.
I
Peter,
think that actually, if you wanted to see some of those wetlands. Oh,
Peter,
sorry.
did you have something?
I had basically Nate's question. Thank you.
All right, great. Other questions from the committee or clarifications needed?
If you wanted to jump back to slide.
Well, Cindy has a question. Go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I had the same question before, which basically was how much restoration has actually been done. And I think you kind of answered that. The first slide showed quite a lot of destruction, and then it looks like the more forested areas are part of the restoration of the gravel mine. When you look at an aerial, it looks more forested.
Yeah, so
Okay.
The restoration work that has occurred, previously up to this point, I think that the most intense focus and the biggest lift is through this work done by the Coastal Watershed Institute to restore the coastline, to remove that shoreline armoring, to allow the sediment process to continue, and to really like recover that big earthen barge thing that was a barb out in the system, right? So I think that that's probably like the biggest single effort. There has also been like the removal of all of the old, like whatever old mining infrastructure and things like that, and rock is taken out. And there's been, I think mostly like a passive and process-based restoration of this 55-acre area that we're talking about specifically today, just through the lack of disturbance and the passage of time, allowing those habitats to start to be reclaimed as freshwater emergent wetlands. The proposed restoration that we would be doing as an agency, this is an acquisition project. We're not proposing this as a restoration project, but when we own land for a wildlife area, we commit to permanently managing that land for restoration of those communities. So it would be doing things like invasive weed control, native plantings, and looking for those opportunities for lift. That's like how we, that's how our wildlife conservation area mission is organized.
I guess I was mostly, usually when there's a mine, although I don't know how old the mine is, there's a reclamation plan, and frequently, because they've dug everything out, they do have it as open, restored to open water. I just wonder if they've completed their reclamation plan, and the aerials that you're showing on, say, page 15 and 24 that shows it more treed and forested is the current condition. It's not,
Yeah,
it doesn't still look like a gravel mine, exposed soils and all that sort of thing, correct?
Yeah, certainly. There is, you can see on here a couple of like big dirt flat spots. Those are the exposed soil areas, and it's interesting. It's like a lot of, it's all native material. It's just like the clay, and there's a lot of fossils present in it. And I think it's just a soil type that's not super supportive of vegetation. But yeah, this is, I mean, I don't know when this aerial is from. It's not like absolutely current, but it's a fair reflection of what you're looking at out there.
Okay, and my last question is just, I'm assuming there's some connection under the highway there. I don't know if it's just down at the mouth of the rivers or if there's other culverts or other connections. Are you aware of where is there a connection from the east and west side of that highway? The red.
Oh,
east
yeah.
highway.
So the reason you'll see here that like there's that estuary, right? And then there's the marine shoreline, and then there's like the highway that snakes through, and it looks like it's actually disconnecting them. There is still like, it's not a full break. It's just that highway comes so far out onto the strait, like it really kind of like daylights out around that bend, that on these maps, like that, you know, that line isn't showing up because it would be so thin. But there's not like an actual, well, you know, if you go back, actually, you can see the bridge. If you go to picture on, where's my bridge picture? Getting there, sorry, folks.
There's one here from the history
No, it's
picture.
would be down in the like community support area. Oh, slide 26. This might show it pretty well. Oh, that last slide was actually a good wetland slide showing our wetlands. So yeah, so that bridge, there we go. This is the actual highway crossing. That's the estuary. So we would be purchasing the near shore, and that purchase would be continuous. This bridge is, you know, is a permanent presence on the landscape, and the West Twin River is passing underneath it.
Okay, thank you.
Is that helpful? There is a culvert on the property. Sorry to jump around so much on slides. If we go back to that buffered fish habitat slide, which is like way.
But Cindy, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess the basic question is, are the two properties, the larger property that purchase of this smaller property is going to make possible? I understand those are connected. Is there a hydrologic connection anywhere other than right at the mouth of the highway river where that bridge is? Is there anything connecting the two, either side of that highway, water wise?
I mean, there's I apologize. I don't feel like I am understanding your question or answering it well. I hear what you're saying. The estuary fans out right underneath that bridge into the strait. And so there's that hydrologic connectivity of the West Twin River to the Central Strait of Juan de Fuca through that estuary and Delta complex that is a continuation from this entire shoreline of this 216 acre property. So the east to west yellow border, right, to the rest of the strait and to the estuary on the east twin.
Maybe I can try.
Yeah, please, I'm sorry.
So Cindy's asking, within this entire geographic envelope, is there a hydrologic connection between the land that is west of the highway and the land that is east of the highway? Because from our perspective, it looks like the water moves to the east and then out through Twin Creeks there, or whatever the name of the creek
West Twin
is.
River, yeah.
West Twin
No,
River. So
absolutely.
does the
Thank you.
water flow across the road, through the road? Is there adequate hydrologic connection there?
Yeah, I really, thank you. That is, sometimes you have to just like explain it to me 6 different ways, right? So no, the water that is present, and if we look back at that liner and that topography, the water that is present on this 55-acre parcel and on this portion of the envelope that is west of Highway 112, that all drains into the strait. Now, once you get on the south side of Highway 112, there's a dip, a seam that runs over, and these tributaries that you see crossing through that parcel drain into the West Twin River. But no, the water drainage pattern for this 55 acres would be down into the strait. It would not be across over to West Twin, and the connection with that West Twin water course is going to be through just that marine shoreline, near shore, and estuary connection.
Thanks, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, I'm
Appreciate
so
it.
sorry it took me so
That's
long
all
to
right.
get there. Thank you, Nate.
All right. Well, thank you, Danielle. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, folks.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Hey, Brent, thanks for hanging in there. Moving on to Seattle Public Utilities, Cedar River. There we go. I'm going to try to hand you your remote control so you can advance your own slides. Go ahead and double click on the screen, see if you can there we go. Looks like it's working.
Great. Excuse me. Good morning. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, colleagues, for having me this morning. Danielle is a tough act to follow. That was fantastic. That looks like an amazing piece of property. I hope that all works out. With this presentation, we're going to move from the beautiful estuaries of the Olympic Peninsula to the much more suburban areas of the most urban county in Washington State, here in King County, and talk a little bit about the Cedar River. Brent Lackey is my name. I'm a senior environmental planner with Seattle Public Utilities. We provide water for all of urban King County, about 1.4 million people from the Cedar River and the Tolt River. Cedar River provides about 2/3 of the water to the people in King County. And we are engaged in a long-term habitat conservation plan effort on the Cedar River, a portion of which is a downstream habitat program that I manage. So that's what we're going to talk about here this morning. I'm specifically locating you to a place called the Royal Arch Reach, which is just adjacent to the community of Maple Valley in southeast King County, just basically the reach immediately, 1 mile reach immediately below the intersection of Highway 169 and Highway 18, for those of you familiar with suburban King County. And then on the right here, you see a zoomed in map of kind of the parcel we're talking about today is the Sherry parcel, owned by Helen Sherry there. It's a 20-acre parcel, one of 2 20-acre large parcels right in the middle of the reach. The green parcels you see there are ones that we've already acquired as part of this program at Seattle Public Utilities. So we're working hard to try and acquire and restore all the property along this entire reach of the Cedar River, primarily with the targeted benefit of helping juvenile life stages of salmonids out there, especially Chinook salmon, but also including sockeye and coho salmon and trout. So the project is, as I say, a piece of a bigger plan. We've already acquired about 14 parcels, or exactly 14 parcels in this reach, totaling about 26 acres over the past 15 years of work out there. And there are these 2 large 20-acre parcels right in the middle of the reach that we're still trying to put into public ownership and restored stream and wetland and riparian habitat. We're at an important juncture now because the Sherry parcel looks more likely to be something we can finally try and have a negotiation to acquire. And because it's contiguous, as I'll describe in some of the forthcoming slides in more detail, to a large-scale floodplain reconnection and riparian and wetland restoration, habitat restoration project that we're finalizing design of right now and will be undertaking construction on this coming next summer of 2023. We've just completed an appraisal of this property that brings us closer to what the owner has been thinking is negotiable price. So at about $2 million on the appraisal, we think we may now have a way to get into the door and really have a serious negotiation with Ms. Sherry about the parcel. Just want to also note, I said at the beginning that this is a piece of a HCP downstream habitat program, but want to make it quite clear that none of the work that would come from this grant is satisfying any sort of mitigation component of our HCP. We're simply leveraging the work we've been doing with the downstream habitat program ongoingly. And we've actually been very successful in doing that in this reach and throughout the 70 acres of acquisition up and down the lower Cedar River. We've been able to leverage grant dollars at about a 4-to-1 ratio over the 20 years we've been undertaking this program. So none of this money would go toward meeting our mitigation commitment. So here's another look at what we're doing and start talking about some of the evaluation criteria that are important to you. I'll try and use yellow to outline the borders of the Sherry parcel in all the slides that we look at this morning. There are about 800 feet of undeveloped Cedar River riverbank there that is undeveloped, unimpacted by anything other than Helen's continued kind of landscaping, which mostly just involves a lot of mowing. It's across the river directly, as you see, from forested property already owned and in public ownership with King County Natural Resources and Parks. Along the riverbank there is fortunately a remaining pretty good little stand of mature conifers, Doug fir and hemlock primarily, that really provide a little bit of the necessary template for an immediate habitat benefit to the riparian area, just from simple revegetation or from even just the discontinuation of the kind of close mowing of turf that goes on kind of around and underneath all those trees. As I mentioned before, we're also in adjacency to a 16-acre floodplain reconnection. That green area that you see there that I'll show you in more detail in coming slides is the area that we're reconnecting in this coming year with a large-scale off-channel and wetland habitat restoration project. We're also adjacent to lots of riparian communities existing both sides of the Sherry property and across the river there for lots of pollination and recruitment of natural revegetation. And as I showed in the reach map, this basically leaves us with just the one parcel. If we can acquire Sherry's parcel, we're just left with the one large 20-acre parcel immediately adjacent. That's to the right in this photo. That's still not in public ownership, although it is owned by Masonic Lodge Park. They use it for a park. The Masons own that property and use it entirely for parkland. So it's not heavily impacted by development at this point either. Here's a little look at the parcel in a LiDAR map, which gives you a sense of a couple of interesting things. The first is clearly that at this 10-year flood model, you can see there's a remnant main stem channel of the Cedar River that runs right through the center of this parcel. Still sees some decent flooding in normal kind of significant flood events. Gives a great opportunity immediately for just allowing the area to become revegetated, to probably get a lot more choked out with veg and start to see some of that existing mowed swale turn into more of an immediate riparian wetland. Certainly when we get into talking about restoration design, which we would definitely do out here, there's a lot of opportunity really related to that low area and that remnant channel there. And then along the stream bank, you can see there's another sort of place where a connection wants to kind of come in from the left to the right there. I assume my mouse will show up sort of through here. There's also, you see this big lobe of land kind of sitting right in the middle of the river here and over here. There's a decent sized naturally occurring and very active landslide happening on the left bank of the Cedar River there that just amplifies the potential benefits for riparian and in-channel habitat here on the Sherry parcel. Zooming in, give you a little better look at what we're talking about then for the existing habitat benefit. You can see there's on the bottom right, that stand of pretty decent conifers that's being mowed around right now, but really provides the kind of structure we would need to see immediate improvement just by the most simple level of revegetation in through there where it's currently just mowed turf. And then you see in the photo right on the riverbank there, some of the existing forests, ground cover, and reminding me to note the fact that there isn't any bank hardening or bank armoring along this 800-foot stretch of the Sherry parcel. It's not actively eroding significantly because it's just one sort of continuous glide through the reach there, something that we look to change once we acquire it and move forward to restore it. But the ease of being able to soften this edge with the river is fairly straightforward. During flooding, as I mentioned, this parcel is already pretty well engaged. This is a significant flood event from just 2 years ago, and it really highlights that even in the immediate, before we try and do any significant kind of off-channel restoration or grading work to restore habitat conditions here, that the river's already working on it pretty good. Flooding this area, there's that side channel at the top of the photo that I mentioned in the LiDAR just a moment ago that we would probably be looking to more significantly reconnect, and certainly be looking to utilize that feature to create a lot more riparian and emergent wetland back there. Here's another a close look at that landslide that I talked about straight across from the downstream corner of the parcel. Something that we would be looking to protect in terms of its benefit to the habitat there, and also probably when we get into designing restoration, try and utilize that feature to continue to amplify the process habitat development benefits that are going on in the Royal Arch Reach on the Cedar there. With regard to planning and community support, good news is that the neighbors right around us all really like what we're doing. We're working closely with all of them. There's actually a decent amount of diversity. I'm sorry, I have a acronym, BIPOC, that many of you probably already know as people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color. Number of folks in that group in the immediate demographic, neighboring immigrant families and African-American folks. We're working collaboratively with 4 of these homeowners right now to develop project agreements essentially for the work that we're doing on the parcels that we own just immediately south of the yellow box here where we're doing next year's restoration. We're working with these folks to put a lot of the fill that we're going to remove to create channels and wetlands in our new property over onto their property to save money and give them an opportunity to level out their properties and make a little money doing so. We're also working on this project in partnership with King County Department of Natural Resources. They're a direct partner through agreement on this process and are helping us with local permitting. And then we also have the support of the Cedar River Council, which is a non-governmental organization made up of stakeholders from both agencies, businesses, and local groups and nonprofit organizations. With regard to stewardship, I'm in a really fortunate position. We've had a long-term contractual relationship with the Forterra organization here in Seattle. Forterra is in the business of acquiring and preserving a lot of different kinds of natural open space lands. And our relationship with them has them ongoingly doing all the strategic planning and restoration management of all the 70 acres that we've acquired in the lower Cedar River. The biggest success of which has been their work on properties we own, as well as with the community adjacent to all the properties we own to work to eradicate the invasion of Japanese knotweed up and down the river. We've essentially, with their efforts, successfully eradicated knotweed from the lower 20 miles of the river. And we're in essentially mile sort of 14, 15 with this project down in here. So we would immediately be able to take this parcel and put it into the portfolio of work that Forterra already does with us. And so it would be essentially a seamless transition to moving into to immediate stewardship of the parcel. I think we'd be in a position to do significant revegetation and invasive species management on this parcel essentially immediately when we become the owners of it. I mean, we might have to wait till the winter weather to get out there and do replanting, but that would essentially be the only obstacle to us going aggressively forward with starting to really restore the riparian vegetation community there. And then further restoration has a lot of opportunity here as well. Looking at the LiDAR again on the left, you can see that there's the work we're doing to the south of this parcel, just upstream, that I'll show you in greater detail in just a sec, can immediately be connected to the contiguous flow of water right across that parcel boundary. As we're designing it now, we wouldn't be making this connection with our current project. We'd essentially be trying to inhibit the river from getting too far in here because we can't worsen flooding on that property we don't own. But the minute we acquire this parcel, we'd be in a position to design a reconnection through here, which would be sort of, to our eyes, the most obvious thing. But then we'd also be looking to utilize some of these other opportunities along the reach, where we might create greater levels of off-channel connectivity, and that would be, you know, permanent year-long off-channel hydrologic connectivity for juvenile fish to get off of the main stem river out here for rearing and refuge habitat. Probably look at doing quite a lot of wetland development in here where this swale is, as well as connecting it back in here, and then ultimately trying to create some sort of a channel reconnection that would work with this landslide dynamic that's here. Which, if you look on the right side, you can see here's where we're designing our project this year. Here's the parcel we're talking about with the Sherry parcel. Here's the landslide right here. You can see the immediate benefits from some of that sediment budgeting going on into the reach just immediately downstream of that landslide. And so we'd definitely be looking to continue to utilize and harness that as piece of this whole reach restoration. Here's the project that I'm just finishing design on this fall, looking to construct in the coming summer of 2023. This is, as I said, kind of a good model for what we'd be trying to do on the Sherry parcel as well. We're utilizing an existing, probably man-made, but nonetheless fairly high quality off-channel stream channel back here, and then building a whole network of additional secondary and tertiary off-channel refuge for fish, and a lot of emergent wetland all through here, with about 800 pieces of large woody debris throughout the site to really restore this thing. Want to note, in case it's not obvious, there is this separation in the middle. Northwest Pipeline actually has a liquid natural gas pipeline crossing that goes right through, fairly deeply buried. We're working closely with those folks, as well as our partners at King County. And they're in favor of what we're doing here. Happy to say that there's not really any big reason to try to connect these channels we've got here coming back into the river across this parcel. Certainly something we considered and discussed with the pipeline folks, and they're not opposed to it per se, so long as we don't send the entire river over here in a way that might avulse and erode down to their pipes. But we're in a situation where, because of the hydrology and hydraulics of the river here, that's not likely to happen regardless. So we're just utilizing the topography to create the kind of stream channel, off-channel refuge that will really work well for fish and wildlife out here without really losing any benefit for the fact that this pipeline crossing is here. But it does complement our overall work in the Cedar among our 70 acres, and has been a top priority, including funding from PSAR and Surfboard on this restoration project for next year, because the top limiting factor really in the Cedar River for Chinook salmon is the lack of rearing and refuge habitat. And as we see climate change continue to worsen conditions, both in the summer with drought, but especially in the winter with greater frequency of atmospheric river flooding events, the poor juvenile fish just more and more need places to get off the big flume of fairly urban Cedar River and into some floodplain opportunities for habitat refuge. There is something of a perceivable threat to the habitat out here. As you can see, there's 3 parcels of 10-acre zoning, really within an island or a sea, I guess, islands within a sea of much greater density and much higher development zoning that we think really represent the threat of potential upzoning, depending on what the future of this parcel is. Again, the Sherry parcel is the south piece of this. This piece across the river is already owned and preserved as King County open space forest, so that's not under threat. This piece is the Masons private park. So for the foreseeable future, that's also not under great threat of rezone. But we worry that when the parcel changes hands next from Ms. Sherry to a potentially her heirs to potentially a developer, that we might see real strong pressure to upzone this to an RA5, a 5-acre zoning, similar to all those parcels right around here, many of which we've already acquired. that would probably lead somebody to be trying to develop 4 lots out of this parcel. It has this existing connection to the highway as well, so there's opportunities for building roads and connections to it. So we're at a great potential moment to try and add this big piece to the portfolio that we've basically been able to acquire the entire upper reach already, and so we're hoping to do so. For community benefit, we already own a bunch of the land, so we're providing critical habitat up and down the watershed already, including our 95,000 acres above the Cedar River Landsberg Dam. We also are going to be able to continue to provide additional flood relief by continuing to see these parcels increasingly connected to the river, doing things we can to restore floodplain reconnection and floodplain storage. We also don't have a formal sort of program of public park there, but we definitely invite people to go and enjoy these parcels that we've acquired. There's significant interpretive signage at a number of the parcels upstream, downstream. This is just in the reach downstream of the Masons Park, just in the lower part of the reach where we've already acquired about 10 acres of land. And of course, we're right adjacent to the growing suburban city of Maple Valley. Maple Valley is a burgeoning town in urban King County. And so this can provide ostensible, pretty easy access to some good open space for people who want to see it. And then also the potential to add this parcel to our Cedar River Docent program. That's where these folks have come to that site as a part of that program that shows people what's going on with salmon and salmon recovery all the way from the mouth of the Cedar River down to Lake Washington up to our closed municipal watershed area. So we think there's a opportunity for immediate protection of a lot of good current benefit here. I should highlight, I didn't really mention it when we talked about Ms. Sherry, but Helen Sherry is an amazing woman who owns this property, this 20-acre parcel. She's a widow who's been there about 70 years now. She's 95. When I called her and spoke to her this week saying, you know, I just want to make sure we're still on track to try and start a negotiation, she said, well, sorry it took me so long to answer. I was under my tractor changing the oil and doing the brakes. So she's maybe going to be out there for a good little while more, even though she's in her 95th year, but it's hard to imagine she'll be there a lot longer. And we're really concerned that we may not have an opportunity to grab up a big piece of land on the rapidly urbanizing Cedar River like this again in the future. There's immediate benefit to be had out here just by basically letting the grass grow and letting the flood kind of work over this property a little bit more, where it's not being given that chance to now because of the kind of level of mowing that she's doing with said tractor. There's also just a gigantic capacity for continuing the restoration objectives. We've already gotten well underway out in this reach and will really greatly enhanced when we build this 16-acre project this next year, creating, as I mentioned earlier, about 3,000 feet of additional off-channel rearing and refuge habitat and several acres of new forested and emergent wetland out there. We would look to do the same kind of thing as I showed you in the presentation here on our property, on this property, on the Sherry property as well. So we think there's great benefit both in acquisition and preservation just to the property as it is now, and then especially once we are able to further leverage grant dollars and our spending to do a significant additional restoration project right adjacent to the one we're doing now. And that, I hope, catches you up on time a little bit. I'm happy to take whatever questions you might have, and thanks for your time.
Great, thank you, Brent. All right, questions from the committee or any clarifications needed? Not seeing any hands yet. I'll just go back to a map. There we go. Well, maybe you
It
covered.
was
it all.
either perfectly clear or it's perfectly clear that you're very hungry for a lunch break.
No, we got one more
Oh,
before
okay.
lunch. We got a short break, but then one more presentation.
Mhm.
All right, going once, going twice. Well, maybe you covered it all.
Well, I hope to, and I'm certainly
Yeah.
happy to answer any follow-up questions if somebody recognizes or realizes in discussion about the project and in ranking these projects and proposals. Just feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, sounds good. Will do. Well, thank you, Brent.
Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it. And thank you all very much. Appreciate your time and energy on this committee. I know it takes a lot of work to do these extra things, so thank you.
All right, see you later. Okay, we have arrived at a break. Oh, just a little bit late if it's all right. Let's just take 9 minutes. Does that work for folks? So we can come back at 11:30 and wrap up. I see a couple thumbs up. All right, see you back here at 11:30. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Carl. How are you doing?
Doing well. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. You're our closer.
Yeah, well, got to send you all out on a bang.
That's right. Exactly. Okay, let me get your PowerPoint up. There we go. Can you see that okay?
I can. I just double click to take control, right?
Yeah, let me hold on. I gotta click on your name first. There you are. Okay, now give it a shot.
I think I've got it.
Excellent.
See if I
There we
can-
go.
Yeah, looks like I can move around. Perfect.
Sweet. Well, whenever, wait, hold on one sec. We got one person got bumped out. Okay, looks like she's back in the room. Okay, whenever you're ready, go ahead, Alex.
Great. Thanks, Carl. Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Jeffers. I'm the Conservation Director with Whatcom Land Trust, and I'm here to chat about the Stewart Mountain Riparian Reserve 2 project, which is application number 22-1279. So to start by getting us oriented to the project, this is in the South Fork Nooksack River Valley here in Whatcom County. Particularly, this is on the east side of Stewart Mountain, which is for those of you who have been to Bellingham, if you're trying to look at Mount Baker from Bellingham, it's the mountain that blocks the view. So this project, so you can see Stewart Mountain outlined in yellow on the map, and the yellow hash marks is what is a proposed community forest called the Stewart Mountain Community Forest, which is a 5,500 acre landscape that's a collaboration between the Nooksack Indian Tribe and Whatcom Land Trust and Whatcom County and local community partners. This property that we're talking about today is the first phase of that community forest. It's 550 acres that represents the most ecologically sensitive portion of the mountain. It's the only spot where the Stewart Mountain comes right down to the South Fork Nooksack River. And it's got portions of 4 salmon-bearing tributaries coming down through here as well, and steep inner gorges. So this is where we're sort of focusing our first efforts for that larger community forest initiative that's meant to address watershed health impairments and salmon habitat in the South Fork Nooksack River. So for this 550 acre property, we can take a look at the budget. It's a just shy of $2.5 million project in total. Whatcom County has already committed $1.5 million from our Conservation Futures Fund here in the county. And we've got a $290,000 partner contribution from that originated with the Whatcom Community Foundation as well. So with that match, that's about 73% of the total project cost. The remaining 27% is to be covered by Whatcom Land Trust. And so that's what we're requesting through WWRP. For the $665,402. And just in terms of timeline, we actually are anticipating this property to close in the next month. We have received a waiver of retroactivity already on the property, and we're ready to sort of move forward with that. We're just waiting on a boundary line adjustment to get completed to make that acquisition. And so this would be looking for reimbursement of land trust funds that we're leveraging in the short term to be able to complete the acquisition. Looking at goals of the project, the first and foremost is improving water quality and quantity in the South Fork Nooksack River watershed. The South Fork is listed as impaired for sediment and temperature, and is sort of notorious for low flows in the late summer as well, being the only fork of the Nooksack that's not glacially fed from Mount Baker. And all three of these have very strong direct impacts on the sort of threatened salmon populations in the Nooksack Basin, and particularly in the South Fork. Providing perpetual, free, and reliable public access to Stewart Mountain, supporting the local timber economy in Whatcom County through active forest management of the uplands, which I'll chat more about a little bit down the line, supporting and enhancing critical wildlife habitat, and leveraging surrounding conservation efforts, both in-stream and forest conservation efforts on Stewart Mountain. So starting with the ecological makeup and the wildlife benefits. So all 5 species of Pacific salmon are present in the South Fork Nooksack River and in this reach. You can see this map here shows the property outlined in red, the full 550 acres. And those green dots are actually documented salmon redds from a 2018 survey done by the Nooksack Indian tribe. So you can see both right along the edge of this property and downstream, there's really significant South Fork early Chinook red activity. This is one of the biggest spawning areas in the South Fork for the Chinook, and steelhead also spawn in this reach as well. And then in yellow there is a 48-acre stand of trees that are about 128 years old and represent really ideal nesting conditions for marbled murrelet. We have not done any surveys there yet. We don't have access to any surveys, but Whatcom Land Trust is planning on doing surveys in there to identify if murrelets are using that habitat. There are occupied nests on DNR land just across the valley, a few miles away from here. And an adjacent DNR piece was called out as a potential marbled murrelet focus area in the long-term conservation strategy. And then finally, this whole area is part of the winter foraging grounds for the South Fork elk herd as well. Looking more specifically at that riparian habitat, the property has about 200 acres of what we would consider riparian based off of our future sort of management activities, which we're defining as HMZ plus 300 feet along the South Fork Nooksack River, as well as 200-foot buffers on all of the fish-bearing streams. And then this is pretty important, 100-foot buffers also on the non-fish-bearing streams. That's one of the big gaps in protection that we see now, because all of these streams have natural fish barriers in the form of small waterfalls that block fish passage, but the habitat above that does not currently have protections through forest practice rules is contributing still to temperature and sediment and allochthonous prey input and all sorts of things like that. So there's about 1.75 miles of direct shoreline along the South Fork Nooksack River on this property, portions of 4 salmon-bearing tributaries, and a forested floodplain area right at the mouth of Standard Creek, which is one of those salmon-bearing tributaries on the property. The northernmost tributary is Hardscrabble Creek, and it's not fish-bearing on this property, but the fish-bearing portion is currently covered by a conservation easement downstream that is held by Whatcom Land Trust. For pollinator habitat, there is sort of early seral habitat on the property that's a product of some of the regenerating stands from commercial forestry practices on the mountain. And part of our proposed management would actually contain some gap cuts to mimic disturbance events and encourage snowpack in some of the higher portions of the mountain, and that would continue the presence of some of that early seral habitat as well, which is a benefit for both pollinators and that South Fork elk herd as well. Looking at surrounding land uses, so as I mentioned, downhill from this property, most of the boundary is the South Fork Nooksack River itself, where the mountain and the forest come right down to the water. Additionally, the rest of the downhill portion is primarily private residential. Some of those landowners have been advocating for upwards of 20 years to prevent harvest in some of these steep inner gorges because of their worries that they have about hillside erosion or stream avulsions or debris flows, which we actually had both a debris flow and a stream avulsion come off the east side of Stewart Mountain during the flooding that Whatcom County experienced last fall. DNR is one of the major neighboring landowners as well. You can sort of see one section that DNR owns. That's what I mentioned has the area that was suggested as potentially marbled murrelet focus area. Private timber is one of the main uphill neighboring landowners, but all of that is part of the proposed future Stewart Mountain Community Forest. So if that effort were to be successful, that would be an additional 5,000 acres that the management that we're rolling out on this property would be able to be extended to all of that contiguous land. And then there are conservation lands downstream as well. As I mentioned, we have a conservation easement on Hardscrabble Creek and its fish bearing portion of that. The current level of protection is primarily based around the county's critical area ordinance and the current forest practice rules, which the county would put a 150-foot buffer along the South Fork Nooksack River, since it is considered a conservancy shoreline. And then the remainder of the fish-bearing streams would have a 110-foot buffer based off of forest practice rules, and the non-fish-bearing streams would just have that 30-foot equipment limitation zone. So we do identify a few gaps that we consider this to present. One is that lack of protection on non-fish-bearing streams. Again, sediment, water temperature, allochthonous prey, and nutrient inputs from upstream, all of these are impacted by those non-fish bearing tributaries. And so not having a buffer on there is one of the sort of factors limiting salmon habitat downstream in the fish bearing portions and in the South Fork. We consider the buffers along the fish bearing streams to be insufficient, partially because of the topography that does have a lot of steep inner gorges. And then there's just few, if any, upland forest management regulations, and having lots of high acreages of stands of regenerating Douglas fir monocultures, studies such as Perry and Jones 2016 and Segura 2020 have been identifying that these do have measurable impacts on stream flow in the late summer months when these Douglas firs are just all acting like straws, sucking up groundwater and limiting the CFS coming from the ground into the river and into the tributaries during the late summer. And so we'd be looking at sort of amending those upland forest practices as well. This property addresses our WIRA 1 salmon recovery plan in the standard and hardscrabble reaches, tier 1 priority of acquiring properties necessary to facilitate restoration. The restoration we would be doing in particular would be actually primarily in sort of forest health restoration, but we've already started conversations with the Nooksack Indian tribe, who's asked us about providing landowner permission once we take ownership for them to do in-stream restoration as well along that 1.75 mile reach of the South Fork Nooksack River. And then also acquiring properties at risk of degradation to protect high quality habitat forming processes. While a lot of the uplands are regenerating Douglas fir stands, there is also that 50-acre 128-year-old forest stand that's about as high quality forest habitat as you can hope to find in the commercial forest zone of Whatcom County. And if that were to be cut, which there have been approved FPAs for that stand previously, it would take 128 years to get it back to where it is now. And then the Whatcom PUD did a regional water supply plan last February that identified the Stewart Mountain Community Forest Project as its top ranked project for regional water supply. And just to name a few other plans that this supports, the Puget Sound Chinook Recovery Plan, which highlights the South Fork Chinook, early Chinook as a priority population, Whatcom County Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan, Whatcom County Comprehensive Plan, looking at the Shoreline Conservancy area, and the long-term conservation strategy for marbled murrelets. Community engagement has been pretty substantial around the larger Stewart Mountain Community Forest Project, and the phase 1 that we're talking about today has been part of that planning process as well. So we have convened an interim community advisory team that's comprised of people from the timber economy, fishing economy, conservation groups, tribes, the university, the local Mount Baker School District, local residents, to come together to sort of work on strategic visioning for the larger community forest effort. And we've been attending local meetings as well for Whatcom County Council, Parks Commission, the Bike and Ped Commission, and the Nooksack Indian Tribe Tribal Council. We've been presenting to them for periodic updates as well. So I've talked a bit about the forest management already, but to dive a little bit deeper into that for how we plan to manage the property. So all of the riparian areas and steep inner gorges, we would be looking at managing those to reach old growth condition. And that's the HMZ plus 300 on the South Fork, 200 feet on the fish bearing streams, and 100 feet on the non-fish bearing streams. For the uplands, we would be looking to manage it for selective harvest and perpetual thinning regimes that incrementally increases those stand ages to help the forest reach hydrologic maturity. And that would be roughly 80 years is sort of what our goal right now is, thinking of trying to get those stand ages up to. And then also reviewing roads and drainages for opportunities for improvement or abandonment as well, recognizing that insufficiently managed roads and culverts are one of the biggest water quality impairing aspects of commercial forest zones. And this management is going to be informed by a lot of diverse groups who have been spearheading this effort, including Whatcom Land Trust, who's been around for 35 years and owns or manages easements on about 16,000 acres here in Whatcom County. The Nooksack Indian Tribe, who's been leading the way on a lot of climate resiliency research around commercial forest properties and forest land and how that impacts watershed health. Whatcom County, who's been really dedicated to both forestry and water quantity issues in our county. The Evergreen Land Trust, who has property right at the foot of the mountain, has been advocating for eco-forestry projects on this mountain for 25 years. And then just a coalition of community partners too, who are intimately familiar with this region, being that it's where they live and work. So the threats that we're really looking to address here is really the impairments in the South Fork Nooksack River in terms of turbidity, flow, and temperature. So the research that's been produced by the Nooksack Indian Tribe and some of the modeling that they've produced through the EPA's VELMA and DHSVM models have really identified that short rotation commercial management of the forests has been a primary driver of the impairments in our watershed, and that forestry itself isn't necessarily a problem, and that having active management that sort of manages for these sort of long-term forest health could have really significant impacts on stream flow. The modeling that they've been producing show that there's a couple additional CFS, even just from the 5,000 acres on Stewart Mountain, that can be expected to be realized from this project. And then addressing short-term land ownership as well. This property has actually changed hands 6 times in the last 30 years, which it really just serves to sort of encourage landowners to buy the property, cut what's merchantable, and sell it to the next person to do the same thing, which makes reliable public access really hard, but also just conservation groups trying to work on these larger watershed issues. We're trying to work with a different landowner every 6 years. So really that long-term local ownership is key to addressing these goals. And then looking at climate change as well, we have the heat wave last summer did lead to the South Fork being even hotter and even lower than it normally gets in the summer. And this photograph is of a mass Chinook die-off where we lost 2,500 pre-spawning adults just in the South Fork last summer, which was a really huge blow to our efforts for Chinook recovery in this basin. And then just a few months later, we had our flooding in Whatcom County too, which led to debris flows and stream avulsions, and the few reds that were able to be established in the river getting washed away. And so being able to sort of temper peak flows in the winter through this hydrologic maturity in the forest, and also contribute to a greater CFS in the river during the late summer is really key to seeing sustainable gains in salmon populations in the river. So then finally, to close it out, community benefits and public access. This particular property is primarily oriented towards the conservation benefits associated with the riparian habitat and the way that the uplands contribute to that. And there is no sort of direct road or trailhead access to this property. So in the immediate future, any public access would likely have to be through the river if there were any. But long term, this would be part of that Stewart Mountain Community Forest, which would open up about 4 different trailhead options for folks to be able to get towards this property. But in terms of other public benefits, again, supporting the local timber economy through these eco-forestry sort of measures that are labor intensive and contribute to jobs in the woods and contribute high quality timber. We do have a large diameter mill in Whatcom County that would be happy to get older trees that are a little bit bigger. And then opportunities to engage schools. There's an elementary school adjacent to this property. There's the Mount Baker High School that is adjacent to Stewart Mountain and has a really strong forestry program and has expressed interest in potentially being able to sort of use this as an outdoor classroom. And then Western Washington University professors as well have expressed interest in students being able to do research. And then finally, supporting tribal treaty rights and cultural access to the property as well, which again is inhibited when you have a new landowner every 6 years. It's hard to sort of maintain that regular and reliable access for cultural and spiritual use. So I know that was quite a bit of information, but I'm happy to clarify, expand based off any questions that you all have.
Great, thank you, Alex. All right, Kurt, you got something?
Yeah, thanks for a really good presentation. I want to understand better kind of the 80-year time frame for forest restoration activities, and then the adjacent future community forest. Is the pathway for the riparian purchase basically an 80-year improvement process, and then it roughly ends, and then the community forest, if acquired, would just continue on into the future? Or are they merged anyway together in both the management goals and especially any legal merger of the 2 properties?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we're essentially looking at for the riparian areas, that we would be managing those for old growth conditions, where the upland forest stands is what we want to really be looking at, incrementally increasing those stand ages while sort of maintaining a perpetual thinning regime on them. And so the 80-year sort of goal that we put up there is that a lot of the research, Perry and Jones and Segura both sort of point to about 80 years being where they start to see sort of the CFS difference coming from watershed from those into the streams. So that's again, sort of the goal point we're putting there. So.
Yeah, and then on that point, is there going to be a different management regime on the surrounding community forest, or is this the exact same regime happening on the riparian as well?
Yeah, this is for all of the uplands in the community forest and in this property, where we would be sort of looking at the same management structure. It's just the direct riparian buffers is what would have a different management in terms of managing for old growth conditions.
And then I understand the benefits to the local economy from that activity, but is there an organizational expectation that is going to pay for the land management going forward? Is that part of the reason, or is that not related to the management?
A little bit of both. Yeah. So we would be expecting that any revenue that would be generated from forest activities would all be going back into the project in terms of road maintenance, road abandonment, pre-commercial thinning, all that stuff that costs money and doesn't make money, right? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kurt. Good to clarify. Glenn, go ahead.
Alex, I'm trying to make sure I understand how this community forest approach would fit with the property you're trying to secure. So the community forest, all of these parties, your organization and the others that you listed would be solely advisory to the landowner that has the timberland upstream from the property you're looking at, or is there some legal mechanism to change the way it's managed?
Yeah, so I'm going to break that out into two pieces. First, this 550 acres that we're looking at. Whatcom Land Trust would be the owner. We would be making the management decisions on that, and it would be advisory from the standpoint of our partners. For the larger 5,000 acres, that's something that, we're a few years down the road on, and we're still sort of figuring out, there's the management on that's going to be a little bit more sort of complex, as it's just a lot larger acreage. And so we're figuring out what that structure looks like. But for this first 550, the land trust would be the owner. We would be the manager making those management decisions based off of a forest management plan that was sort of, advised by the partners.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. Great presentation. I was wondering about Conservation Forestry LLC. I guess it's an equity firm that owns most of that land in the community forest area. Have they given any indication of, like a right of first refusal or anything that they would sell that to the community forest?
Yeah, so we're talking about the remaining 5,000 outside of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't have a recorded right of first refusal at this point, but they have sort of expressed an interest in selling that portion of their ownership, and they actually helped pay for an appraisal this past year in partnership with us for that as well. But we've not signed a right of first refusal at this point yet, just because we're still sort of coming to terms with each other on pricing and things like that.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other questions or clarifications needed? All right, I think we're good. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you joining us.
Yep, of course. And thank you all for your thoughtful questions. And I know Carl and Kim and Tessa all have my email. So if other questions come up, don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, thanks. Will do. Bye-bye. All right, everybody, that brought us to the end. I have a few project clarifications for you, questions that came up yesterday and today. So just before we close out and then go to our wrap up, one yesterday, Kim graciously jumped in to confirm the question about a landowner acknowledgement. And I just want to confirm that again. Yeah, there are different pathways to obtain a landowner acknowledgement in an acquisition. The most common is simply folks just use our form. Most landowners sign it and mail it back, but that doesn't always happen. So there are other pathways as long as the landowner is in fact notified in some way. The DNR project we heard yesterday on Stavis, question came up regarding match because they were hoping to use REPI, R-E-P-I funding that comes through the Navy, so like mitigation funding, as match to buy all of the property. And while that is likely, maybe even highly likely, because they have been partnering in this area for some time, it is not guaranteed and not currently in place. So they're current, if you go back to that project and look at it, we have adjusted the acres with the current grant request. I forget the dollar amount off the top of my head, but they could buy 85 acres. And so that adjustment has been made. They of course do hope to partner with the Navy to get that money to buy all of it, which is about 160, about twice that acres. The issue is that the Navy won't move on something until they've secured, it's like a chicken and egg. So until they secure this funding and have appraisals and reviews, they can't go get anything from the Navy. So clarification there. Today, there was the WDFW Twin Rivers up in Clallam. And I think we clarified that, but they'll be buying with this money, the 55 acres, adding to, they already have a grant on the remainder of that envelope, and it just wasn't enough due to inflation. So they're requesting this grant this year for that 55 acres. So the stream miles and shoreline miles will also get adjusted, although we haven't had time to do that in PRISM. And then finally, we did get word back from WDFW over in the Okanagan, and both rivers, Similkameen and Okanagan, are closed to siphon and motorized dredging. So there's no risk there on those properties. The public is allowed to simply pan for gold, but that's pretty low impact, and there's short windows of time that they can do that. So hopefully that clarifies that. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure everybody heard that. And that if evaluators, you can just stick around, we will do kind of a wrap-up conversation about process and how this went. And that so that's the end of our meeting. So we'll just close out and stop our recording and everything. So thanks for joining us, anyone that was out there. We will have results of the evaluation within should be within 2 weeks. We'll be able to let folks know how all these projects ranked, and we appreciate the advisory committee being here to help us out, and anybody